Good evening, folks. And today, on this March already day, we have a speaker who may not known by some, but she is the wife of one of their members, Chris Gwyntopher, who is going to speak to us today about a group that she is very strongly attached to. The group is called At Ease, and I'll let her explain more for you. Gwyn.
All right, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk about At Ease. Do tell me if you can't see my lips. I have a fairly small laptop, so if you want to see the lower face, that's what you've got.
We can certainly see the lower part and most
right.
of your
Well,
face.
I was asked to show the lower part for people who want to lip read. So
you can move back a bit, and then we'll see it. You can move back a bit, and then we'll see all your head.
Is that all right?
Perfect.
That's good.
Right. Yes, At Ease is an advice, information, and/or counselling service, depending what the client wants, for people in the armed forces. Perhaps it's easy to explain what we do if I explain briefly how we got started. We were started by actually a group of pacifists, which later led to great suspicion from the authorities. One prosecuting lawyer said, "Imagine people who didn't believe in marriage running a marriage guidance council." And that is what these pacifists are claiming to advise members of the armed forces about their problems. The reason that we started was it's founded in 1973. I had joined it before it opened a counselling service in October 1974. It was founded at first because there was a lot of publicity in the press about young soldiers, teenage soldiers, committing suicide because they couldn't leave the army. And some had left notes or told their family. This is at about the same time. There was, in those days, an organisation which doesn't exist anymore. As its name sounds, was an advice service for people who became conscientious objectors. Now, they had, thank you, darling. They had necessarily fairly strict criteria about who was and who wasn't a conscientious objector, because their job was to support the genuine conscientious. Very, very difficult procedure to be recognized as such and allowed to leave. But because they were known as helped people get out of the army, they had lots of particularly young people coming to them asking for their help, who weren't by any degree conscientious objectors, were people who, for any reason, had joined had made a mistake in joining their job, and as has happened to anybody at the age of 15, as it was at that time, choosing the wrong job or choosing the wrong college or whatever, making a mistake and regretting it. And there was nowhere at that time to send these people. So Myrtle Solomon, who was at that time the main advisor for these people, thought there was a need for a separate organization, not for conscientious objectors, but simply for members of the armed forces who had a problem that couldn't be resolved or wasn't being resolved within the armed forces, which led back to the youngsters committing suicide as the only way out. So we, at the beginning, I think, were fairly naive. We thought it couldn't be possible in modern times that somebody couldn't leave for their job and had to commit suicide to escape from it. We thought it was just young people being diffident, not knowing what was the correct procedure, who to approach, and many of these kids didn't have family support. So we thought we'd advise them, and we again naively we thought if we found someone who was unhappy, all we had to do was write to the commanding officer and say, "Oh, I'm sure you'll let this lad out." We knew there were regulations, so we bought them. Cost us several £100 for the Army, Navy, and the Air Force, and we bought the Manual of Military Law. When these huge volumes arrived, and it dawned on us, these represent all the laws that don't apply to civilians. It's a completely different, it's like learning the law system of a different country. And as I've become more and more convinced in my years with at ease, joining the armed forces is almost like entering a state within a state. It has different laws. You can be imprisoned. You can be imprisoned in a civilian prison along with people who've been convicted of a criminal offense, but for actions that are not any action that a civilian could commit. It has its own medical system. It has its own legal system. It has its own religious advisors. People with in the armed forces are not supposed to go outside. Unlike other European countries, they are forbidden by law to have a union. The expression of a collective grievance is not allowed. There is a complaints procedure, but one person has to make the complaint, and it must only be on their own behalf. We call this the we call this the Bekentze. I'm sorry, I forgot the name. We call it the Oliver Twist rule. Oh. In the story of Oliver Twist, you remember all the boys in the workhouse were hungry, but they had to draw lots for or get one of their number to go and say, "I'm hungry," and hold up his bowl. Well, this is like the forces. If you are sent into battle with inadequate protective clothing, if you are on a training exercise in a heat wave and it is dangerous and could actually cause your death, one of you has to say, me, am the one who's making a complaint, and I'm only complaining about myself. Recently, it has come to light that this is very much a problem for women. If you are in a situation where the sexual harassment and humiliation of women by a group of more senior ranks is affecting a lot of you. One woman has to identify herself. And then the complaint system, before it can go even to what is called the ombudsman, but is different from the European practice, is it means that it has to go through the chain of command. This is why the harassers tend to be the judge as to whether this is a sufficiently justified complaint. I could go on for a long time about the many, many different injustices. You say, well, how can a bunch of civilians with no power, or no money, no influence help? One is that our form of counselling very often is allowing the person with the problem to talk about it, where even, as it were, even in a way he or she is talking to themselves to clarify what they really want to do. If they, which they can't do, if you discuss a problem with your immediate colleagues, you are in danger of being identified as a troublemaker. If you, as I say, with the service complaint, it has to start with, it has to go all through the chain of command, which means at one point it reaches the level of whoever is harassing you, or whoever is senior to the person who, or people that are harassing you and has condoned it, but they're in judgment whether you're justified. And it gives a chance somebody to come anonymously, to talk in confidence, to then really find what they want to do, with a counsellor who will sympathetically not tell them what they ought to do, but be able to say, if I understand you, are you saying you need to choose between this or that, and these will be the consequences? What do you think you really want to do? And this may take several sessions, but is very, very helpful. And there's no other person they can turn to within the forces. The welfare officer is at the senior rank and committed to the army. The chaplains are trained at Sandhurst, and they are trained in all forms of welfare, the same as any other officer, in order to be an officer, in order to be a chaplain. Nowadays, actually, there is a respite from this because there's a shortage of chaplains. Some units are engaging local clergy as honorary chaplains. And it's possible you get someone who's more militaristic than an army officer. But we have had good experience where they've gone to a civilian chaplain who's got no axe to grind, empathetic. But that's there's a postcode lottery there, because most still have the officer. No, we're all volunteers. It's a part-time service. The intake volunteer is responsible once a week for what comes in. We can, the way we've started for pacifists, we are committed to non-judgmental, non-directive counselling. And that we have in common with the ethical standards of many other professions. We differ from the British Association of Counsellors, which defines counselling as distinct from information giving and distinct from advocating with a client group or civilians, because there's other places you can refer them for information or advocacy. The counsellor can concentrate on what do you think about the problem. At ease counselling is different. It's dependent on what the client wants. We do give information, we do give advocacy, but it's what the client wants. Many of our cases, they don't want counselling, they don't want advocacy, they want the accurate information, which is difficult to give at the moment. One problem we're working on is that Queen's regulations doesn't affect, and the MOD hasn't got round to publishing King's regulations. Meanwhile, there appear to be changes of policy, particularly affecting dates at which people can leave. And we can't find out what the rule is because King's regulations has yet to be put before Parliament. I think the present King may pass away before his regulations are passed, but that's the kind of time-consuming administrative problem that these workers have to deal with. But the quality, the main quality we ask, people can be of any background. Some are veterans, some have always been civilians. Some can be people committed to the military, but very angry about the injustices and lack of human rights of members of the armed forces, particularly those in the UK, as compared to the better procedures for other Western European countries. But what is important is that we have to have the self-discipline to put our own beliefs and our own opinions on one side. I don't mean deny them. On a rare, very rare occasion, a client or a relative will ask what the background is. But usually they don't want to know. What needs to be concentrated on is the position of the client. But at this, we often find a lot of people in peace movements, including some Quakers, can't understand this and say, well, it's shocking. You help people appealing against unfair dismissal. How can you help someone get back in the army? I try to explain it by an analogy. In the First World War and the Second World War, as you know, the Friends Ambulance Unit worked, including working at the front line of the battle. Now, imagine a situation, you've got a wounded soldier on a stretcher. On one end of the stretcher, there is a medical orderly who is a soldier. On the other end of the stretcher, there's a conscientious objector working for the Friends Ambulance Unit. In that situation, both people are agreed they've got to get the wounded person to hospital as soon as possible. You don't talk politics in that situation. You don't think about, am I justified in picking up this particular person? Is my position different from the body on the stretcher or the person at the other end? You try to help. And this is what we ask, and it is hard. People in the peace movement, we have a dress code. If you're meeting an at-ease client, you check that you're not wearing your badges and your T-shirt from the day before. And that is, you know, I very often wear a badge on my hat. I've literally and metaphorically a different hat on when I'm in a Tees Council. You sometimes feel a bit Jekyll and Hyde, but we have to make that thing. And in a way, I say that is being less militaristic. What is the situation of a soldier? I have heard in four different judicial settings that a member of the armed forces, the personal opinion as to whether a particular war or action is justified is irrelevant. They are just to obey orders. If we want to be truly anti-militaristic, the idea of one person trying to persuade or impose their beliefs on the actions of another person is being militaristic. When I believe when I help someone appealing against unfair dismissal, or I help an AWOL to go back and give himself up because that's what he wants to do, some fellow pacifists would say I was betraying my beliefs. I believe that is being truly anti-militarist, because I'm not treating that soldier the way the army treats him. I'm doing the opposite. I'm saying it's your decision, it's your life. What do you really want to do? And that, I believe, is real anti-militarism, because anti-militarism is not just against violence, it's against the coercion and the duplication and the seduction. And at ease, in a small way, it's trying to counteract that. I usually find that people are puzzled about at ease. So I'm in the time we've got left, I'd like to just answer questions if you have any.
Thank you. That was interesting because, as I said before, I knew very little of it, only of what was mentioned by Chris and others. So I am more informed. The question I would suppose I would ask is, you only involve in where people want to leave or go back again?
Oh no, it can be any problem. Yes, we're not involved in a belief. As I say, sometimes it's staying in. If I could give an example, there is, and sometimes it's their treatment within the forces.
Right.
We do help people who want to, who don't want to leave, without much success, because the army does not want ever to admit that it's made a mistake or acted unjustly. If a civilian is unfairly dismissed, they can go to a tribunal and put their case. Now, members of the armed forces are disqualified from a tribunal. There's only two instances in which they can go. One is if the dismissal was due to racial discrimination, or the dismissal was due to sexual discrimination. Now, these are the only cases. So you don't have to just prove that there was no justification for you being discharged. And it's very, very difficult. I've witnessed such a tribunal because it's not enough that you suffered racial harassment in the army, for instance, and you were unfairly dismissed. You've actually got to prove that that dismissal was a result of racial prejudice. And you've got to bring evidence that you've got to produce, like you've got to produce a white person in the same circumstances who's still in the army. It is almost impossible to prove this. Now, where it is cases that we've been, where it's really a problem are people from the Commonwealth. When there is when there is a shortage, the army goes in for very heavy recruitment in parts of the Commonwealth countries. And recruits are told if they serve a minimum of 4 years, they can apply for British citizenship. And of course, they understand, serve 4 years, and I can become a British citizen. Well, of course, the catch is in the word apply. You can apply for British citizenship. Anybody who's dealt with refugees and migrants knows it is a very, very long and very expensive process, even to get indefinite leave to remain, after which it's a very long and very expensive and very difficult process to get citizenship. But what these people, particularly English isn't their first language, are told, serve 4 years, and then you can be a British citizen, you can stay in Britain, and you'll have a civilian job and earn money and send back to your family. That is what they hear. They're also told, but if you leave before 4 years, you can be deported. You'll have to leave, or you can be deported. Which again, they understand as, if I choose to leave the 4 years, then they can deport me because I haven't served the 4 years. Well, fair enough. This again is a catch. Nobody leaves within 4 years voluntarily. You can't. The minimum service is 4 years. So if they tried to leave and tried to get on transport to go home because they were unhappy, they would be AWOL, and they could be court-martialed, put in detention, and then returned to the army. But what it does mean is if they are discharged against their will, and this has given racist NCOs and some officers a lovely tool. They know if a Commonwealth national is discharged before the 4 years, then they will be deported. And what happened, and I've had these allegations from someone from Ghana, someone from India, someone from Sierra Leone, of being picked on for minor offences, so that which at NCO level they can give an extra guard duty, that sort of thing, until it lines up that they've several disciplinary offences and appear before the commanding officer, which looks bad. It looks like this guy is totally undisciplined. And so they get discharged. And some NCOs actually tell them this. One guy was taunted, "We're going to get you sent back to India." You know, they know that they can do it. Now, I'm not saying this happens to every Commonwealth incident. No doubt there are some that are treated very fairly, go on to have a good career, and end up as poster boys for the army. But then people don't come to our teams to say, "I've come to tell you I'm very happy, I'm being treated, there's no racism in my regiment." The only people that come to us are the people with problems. Now, when the guy is discharged, suddenly, and it's confused, they then get what I call the brutal letter from the Home Office, not from the army. This is from the Home Office, saying, "You were given a visa for your service in the armed forces. You have left before that is. Therefore, you must leave this country in 48 days or be deported. Whilst you remain in this country, you must not take paid employment and you have no recourse to public funds." It is possible, if they launch a service complaint, that the deportation is not enforced, but they they are not allowed to work or have recourse to public funds. They can get, because whilst they've been in the army, they've been paying national insurance, they can get a few months job seekers allowance, although they're not allowed to seek a job. But when if that is exhausted, they are then like what are classed as illegal immigrants. I'm using the government's term. And they are rendered destitute. Now, these are the sort of circumstances. This is not somebody who wants to leave the army, but has grave problems. I mean, I can give other instances where leaving the army is a problem, such as if they're given a medical discharge on mental health grounds, which can prevent them having a civilian job or something. Are there any other questions?
Can't hear you, David.
No, sorry, I just said, wow. I wasn't aware of much of this, and it's it seems incredibly unfair, and I wonder if what kind of is there any movement for reform? I mean, you're dealing with the end of the problem, but is there any thought to make things fairer?
Yes, one movement for reform I would recommend. There is an organization called Forces Watch that publishes a very, very good online newsletter, which it does take up many of the issues that we're dealing with. They're not an advice service for the individuals, but they are very good. There's also a lawyer, Emma North, who has started a thing called the Centre for Military Justice, which is campaigning on certain issues, particularly the situation of women facing sexual harassment and rape within the forces. One of the injustices is that if an offence is committed against a victim, and the offender and the victim are both employees of the armed forces, they're both in one of the forces, then the case is not dealt with by the civilian police or the Crown Prosecution Service. It is entirely dealt with within the military justice system. The military justice system means it goes through the chain of command. And the rule is it's settled at the lowest level, but if the person appeals and keeps appealing on either side, it goes up to the commanding officer, and then it goes up to a thing called the Army Complaints Board. And then after, and I'm talking about a process that can go on for over a year, finally it can go to a military ombudsman. Now, can you imagine any other thing where things like rape or murder are left to an employer? Oh, the victim and the offender are in the same company, so the employer deals with it. I mean, it's almost back to the Middle Ages, where the lord of the manor was the landowner, was the employer, and was the judge of all the people in the village. That is the situation in the forces. And there was recently yes, that as I say, forces. Yes, At Ease does present evidence to forces. Every 5 years, there's a thing called the Armed Forces Bill, which where the members of Parliament consider whether any changes in regulations, because remember, all these injustices are in theory backed by Parliament. You know, the King's regulations or Queen's regulations are like the Crown Prosecution Service. It's in the name of the public. So in theory, it isn't even the army that's to blame when there's army injustice. It's the politicians. But the politicians don't like to be seen to be contradicting senior military because it might look unpatriotic and so forth. And the most recent example is that Parliament did have an inquiry, and it was women in the army, and it ironically, as it turned out, had the subtitle "Protecting Those Who Protect Us." And women in the army were invited to come forward and tell the parliamentary committee if they had any problems as women in the army. And the chair thanked the Secretary of State that they were given permission to talk to the MPs, which would not normally be allowed. And you think they're citizens, they should be allowed to talk to MPs, but they were given special permission.
Would your organisation be involved in anything like the deep cut barracks and other incidences like that?
Yes, deep cut, none. Yes, we try. Sadly, none of the deep cut victims were our clients. I wish they had. Deep cut is very significant. This was a situation where a number of young recruits at different times were found dead in suspicious circumstances. Now, as I say, the civilian police are not involved in crime. If someone is found shot dead, a civilian in a civilian street, immediately you have a scene of crimes surrounding the place. The police begin their investigation immediately. In the case of Deep Cut, the Surrey police, who are the civilian authority, weren't allowed in until the army had done their grade. And that is the same situation with the most recent similar one. A young 19-year-old gunner found shot dead, and it had to be a police, and it was found. The army investigations decided it was suicide because she was sexually harassed by her immediate boss, who was phoning her constantly, demanding sex with her. And of course, she had no escape. He was her line manager. Now, in the case of Deep Cut, and there's interesting stuff written by not only in the parliamentary court. When the MPs investigated, they found that the ones who died, and the army concluded by their investigation that every one of these deaths was suicide. When the police they found that these young recruits who died were not the only ones who were being bullied and humiliated by a group of NCOs. And when they were asked, well, why had nobody made a complaint? They had not made a complaint because they were afraid of the reprisals. Now, this is a problem that's gone on all the time that Hadith has been in existence. We've come across people. If you speak out, if you are thought to be a potential whistleblower, you will have very, very severe harassment. And with at the time, I wrote about it for our website, and it was I had to amend it. My original thing, I said that we will never know for certain whether any of those deaths were murder, manslaughter, or suicide. But then I added, but we have so many times brought to the attention of MPs the extreme unhappiness and vulnerability of young recruits in the army, and this has been ignored, that we could say that these deaths, which were preventable, that the members of the House of Commons are responsible for collective manslaughter. And I sent that to our extremely sympathetic website provider. And now a fellow member of At Ease objected to this wording, because at that time we were coming up to it was part of the evidence we were preparing for the Armed Forces Bill, where we submit. And he said, look, we are trying to get the influence of members of parliament. We're trying to win friends and influence people, accusing them of collective manslaughter is going to put them on the defensive. That is not the way we get the support of MPs, by accusing them of collective manslaughter. So I wrote to the website provider who said, "Oh, cut that bit out." And he came back, he said, "Oh, I'm sorry I've got to cut that bit out." That was the best bit. I wanted to put that in. But yes, this was our attitude. And there's also stuff, including a book that's been written by the mother of one of the victims about how her son was perfectly happy and content the night before he was killed, and going back from leave to the army. Also a friend who was on, another soldier who was on duty with one of the women who was killed, sort of almost an hour before she was killed. Again, perfectly happy, no signs of suicide. But again, we will never know. But we could only make our comments because our comments on the situation, but it's part of the big problem. At the moment, it's in preparation, but we're circulating members of At Ease with a standard letter asking them to take up with their own MP this question of allowing at least cases of rape or sexual harassment to be dealt with by the civilian police and the Crown Prosecution Service. This was raised at the 2011 Armed Forces Bill and was vetoed by agreement between the two major parties, the Conservative and Labour Party, agreed to drop it, and strongly supported by the Scottish Nationalists. I will say, when we are lobbying MPs, when we're trying to raise questions of injustice, the most support we get is from the Scottish Nationalists. But of course, they're a minority in vote. When the and this has been true when we've they raised the maximum sentence for avoiding a deployment to a war posting is now life imprisonment. It used to be 2 years imprisonment, but it's now life imprisonment. If somebody does not board a plane going to a war that he believes is wrong, and so he stays away and immediately gives himself up the moment the plane has left and said, "It's because I'm opposed to this war," he could get life imprisonment. And it was Scottish MP for the Western Isles that was prepared to bring a resolution to leave it at 2 years. On 3 issues that came up, one affecting gays, another affecting people with disease, and this question of allowing the civilian police to deal with sexual harassment and rape. The Conservative and Labour agreed to withdraw the resolution. Each of the resolutions, it was strongly supported by the nationalists, and we. And as I say, this is a current issue. We are appealing, and in fact, it doesn't have to be members of At Ease. If members of this group were interested, I could send a copy of the letter we're suggesting, because we're asking individuals to say, can these offences be dealt with by the civilian police? And you see, it's a matter of protection. Say, if a woman is a victim of a stalker, who's following her to work, following her at home, she can report it to the police, and the police can warn the person off and prevent anything worse happening. If a woman is in the armed forces, it's particularly where the offender or potential offender is of a senior rank. She can do nothing. He can decide where she works, where she stays, where she goes. He can order her to go to his presence and she's under his order. And there's no question of that she can't go to it, because if she raises the she's got to start with her immediate superior, who's the attacker. So it is extreme. So we're asking, and at the moment it's not likely to be raised by the parties because it's not an election issue. They want more votes. Members of the armed forces are a minority in the population, so they're a minority in every constituency. Women in the armed forces are a minority within a minority. So we're pointing this out and saying, is there one MP with the integrity to say, okay, this isn't a vote-catching issue for the election, but MPs had an inquiry. They were overwhelmed by the number of inquiries, a number of problems presented. They hadn't expected so many women to come forward, and they were further shocked by the high number that raised questions of sexual abuse, harassment, and even rape. And a cross-party committee, the Conservative chair, recommended that the Crown Prosecution Service and the civilian police should be in charge of such offences. And the MOD, in effect, just said, no, this is to be dealt with within the chain of command. And the MPs have given in.
No.
They've given. So what was the point of that inquiry? The women took the risk of coming forward. So everyone, including their abusers, knows she was a whistleblower in effect, but nothing's going to happen.
Mary, you wanted to ask a question. You're muted. You're muted, Mary.
I was wanting to know the name, please, of your parallel organisation. You're called At Ease, but you mentioned another one.
Oh, I mentioned, yes, Forces Watch.
Forces Watch
is a very good campaigning organisation. It's an anti-militarist campaigning organisation, but it does a newsletter that is very, very informative.
It amazes me that these got off the ground at all.
Yes. The other thing is that it's amazing that we've survived, because so many good organizations have suffered because of COVID and the various problems. I mean, other organizations like Veterans for Peace have closed down completely. And yes, it's amazing we got off the ground, and it's amazing that we've survived, and it's particularly amazing that we've survived in any form, though very much damaged through COVID. But Forces Watch is still going, though I think they're short of staff, and they're appealing for new staff, and they're appealing for funds. but they still exist. And yes, it is a membership organization, so you can join it as a supporter.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One of the sad things I think has happened, and I object to it enormously, is that the government has provided money so that schools can have cadet units within the schools. And this is provided money, this money provided by the present government. And
Yeah.
I think that is so wrong-headed in so many ways, you know, that I live very near a place called Clifton College, and they have, I can see them marching up and down in their schoolyard, you know, and it's not right, I feel.
Yes, well, we don't normally do. We do actually have one current at ease case who is a cadet who wrote in, has been referred to an at ease counsellor because he was having problems being in the cadets. I think it was partly a family problem. I think divorced parents, one very keen on the cadets and one wanting him out, and the kid caught in the middle. But yes, it is a bad thing. Well, with at least one thing we try to do is to inform potential recruits of the problems they might face, particularly with regard to the most common, the most common inquiry to us is from people wanting to get out before the end of their engagement. They don't understand the extreme length. It's 4 years full-time service after the age of 18. But if you join at 16, it's 6 years full-time service before you can get out. The earliest age is 22. Unless you leave in a very small amount of time, the recruit's right of discharge right at the beginning, but otherwise you are committed. At present, we have a form which we have a little leaflet which can be given out at schools or outside careers office, which at present is focusing on two things that are current. One is that it just simply gives information. One is that members of the Royal Navy are currently assisting the armed forces of Israel in the war in Gaza, war with Gaza. And members of the British Army have been trained to assist deportations to Rwanda. And then underneath, we say when recruits join the UK armed forces, they have a commitment for the whole of their service that they must obey every order, even if the order is something that they believe to be wrong. And if we can get that message to the kids, so if you know of a school that's starting a cadet force, it's worth, and you would be willing, at ease would be quite happy if anyone was willing to give these out at the school gates to the kids, or to send them to the teachers or to the head teacher, that the kids know. And at the moment, a lot of youngsters, certainly in Bristol, are involved in campaigning on Gaza. A lot of them have friends who are migrants, you know, who know that this is unfair, that people in the future could be sent to Rwanda. And this is something to say, but if you join the forces, you've got to do the dirty work. You've got to do whatever they tell you. And I think it's worthwhile giving these. And it's not just people in the cadets. There's always been people in the peace movement have been sympathetic to those who join the particularly the army at the age of 16 and don't understand their contracts. Now the pressure, because the policy is to reduce the numbers in the infantry and concentrate on advanced technology and advanced weapons, particularly nuclear weapons, the pressure is on 18-year-olds leaving school, particularly those with science A-levels, because they can be offered sponsorship to university. And this is very, very tempting. On the one side, if they go to university normally, they face having to pay tuition fees and living on a student loan and being heavily in debt when they graduate. What the Air Force and Navy and the Army as well, large branches offer, they will sponsor them at university. They will pay all the tuition fees, all the exam fees, and they don't have to get a student loan. They will be paid a wage as a full-time member of the forces for the whole of their training and their vacation. So it is very, very tempting. Of course, what they don't tell them is that they won't be able to leave at the end of the minimum period in return for the educational post. They are contracted for many years after. But again, for some, you won't be an unemployed graduate in debt. You will be a highly paid officer when you graduate with a guaranteed career. It's very tempting. So it's not just, if you like, the 13, 14-year-olds being brought into the cadets. It's the 18-year-olds leaving who need to know the extremity of joining and the commitment that they make. So if anybody wants to, or knows anybody, or knows a group that might be willing, as I say, this little leaflet about Gaza and Rwanda and not being able to follow your own beliefs, it's mainly designed for being given out outside army careers officers, like the one in Canmore in Centre Town. But it is also suitable for job fairs, and it's also, I think, suitable for schools, particularly schools that are inviting the forces in and recruitment drives, or setting up cadet forces. It's something to offer.
Thank you.
Right. Well, that has been great. I can safely say from all my friends around me, as I say, that has been an interesting and productive morning for us all.
Thank you.
Lots of stuff which we didn't know, which we are now far better informed. And as David tells us often, when it goes, this will go kind of online for other people to watch, and we know that lots of people follow us in that sense, you know, so it'll be picked up by a number of others. Am I right in this, David?
It varies depends on the title. We get random numbers of viewers. Sometimes we get videos watched by 100 people. Sometimes they're watched by 10. We'll find out. Yes, they do get a wider circulation and a longer life than just this, just the audience. Thank you, Gwyn.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, from that, I could say we have come to a natural conclusion. And next week, an interesting discussion. I have known person being discussed for an extremely long time, and has always been a very good friend. This is Marion Lieberman, who will be in conversation with Patsy next week. So do come along. I'm sure to be very interesting.